Pessoal, o interessante, né, é que com a internet, com essa tecnologia que dispomos hoje, nós podemos encontrar, né, diversos vídeos dos próprios autores nos falando sobre as suas teorias. É o caso, por exemplo, do Piaget, né? É o caso, então, do Skinner. Então, nós vamos assistir agora, convido vocês para assistirem agora um vídeo que talvez seja um dos mais longos que incluímos aqui na nossa disciplina, né? Mas que é um vídeo importante, porque o Skinner, ele mesmo conversar com a gente sobre o que ele pensa da psicologia, né? Qual é o caminho que a psicologia fez até aquele momento, né? Como é que ele se encaixa nessas teorias. E uma das coisas, né, desse vídeo, esse vídeo é um discurso, né, uma palestra, melhor dizendo, que ele faz ao receber um prêmio, e 8 dias depois ele veio a falecer. Então é o último vídeo do Skinner, e um vídeo em que ele se dispõe a ser bastante didático sobre a sua teoria, sobre então o behaviorismo radical. Vamos assistir.
On August 10, 1990, in Boston, Massachusetts, B.F. Skinner received the American Psychological Association's Special Presidential Citation for lifetime contributions to psychology. On this occasion, he delivered the keynote address for the 98th Annual Convention of the APA.
This association has always been very good to me. I went to my first meeting in 1932. Most of you were not yet born, I suppose. My paper was on schedules of reinforcement, believe it or not, and it was at the very end of the program, and almost everyone had gone home, but one person who stayed was Richard M. Elliott, who 4 years later gave me my first job at the University of Minnesota. Later, the association provided space for a conference on the experimental analysis of behavior that some of my friends and I had organized, and that became, of course, Division 25. Somewhere along the line, I also received your Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award, and now this, probably the greatest honor in my life. I am extremely grateful. It has been suggested that I might make a few remarks in return. Psychologists, following the philosophers, have looked inside themselves for explanations of their behavior. They have felt their feelings and observed their states of mind and mental processes through introspection. Introspection has never been a very satisfactory process. Philosophers have acknowledged its defects, but argued that nevertheless it is the only way to self-knowledge. The psychologists tried to improve it. Wundt and Titchener particularly invented brass instruments, as William James called them, to present stimuli, the effects of which were to be introspected, and they trained observers. A trained observer, for example, could see red without seeing it as a red object. That was a stimulus error. Watson, of course, attacked introspection in his manifesto of 1913, and I suppose you could say he was successful because, at any rate, psychologists have stopped introspecting almost entirely. Cognitive psychologists probably see the representations of reality they talk about. In fact, they say that's all you possibly can see. But I don't think they claim to see themselves processing them, storing them in memory, retrieving them, and so on. Instead, they have resorted to theories. Theories about what is going on in the head or the mind. But theories have to be confirmed, and the question is, how can you be sure a theory is right until you can see what it's a theory about? Well, as you know, most of them have turned for that to brain science. The mind is what the brain does, and the brain can be inspected rather than introspected like any other organ. But does the brain really initiate behavior as the mind or self was said to do? The brain is part of an organism, and what it does is simply part of what the organism does. It is part of what is to be explained. Now that explanation, I think, can only be found by looking outside the organism, the individual, rather than within. And it is found in three kinds of variation and selection. The first of these was natural selection, which explains why we have a body and a brain at all. But there was a difficulty with that. It prepares a species only for a future that resembles the selecting past. That fault was corrected by a further evolutionary step, the evolution of operant conditioning, which enabled the environment of the individual to select behavior with contingencies that were not stable enough to work through natural selection. However, one can learn very little in a solitary world by operant conditioning, but unless you have the social environment, which is a rich set of contingencies of reinforcement and responsible for the elaborate repertoires we all acquire. Cultures also evolve, and that is the third type of variation and selection. Now, if these three external kinds of circumstances explain what the body does, then what is this mind or self supposed to be doing? Does it exist? There seems to be no room for it in a scientific account. You can say it is explained by contingencies of selection and in turn explains behavior, but that isn't necessary. You can skip the thing entirely. Well, let's start again, and we'll start a long way off. Everyone talks about behavior and did so long before there were philosophers or scientists of any kind. We all speak it. It's a vernacular. It's a proper word to call it. A vernacular is not pejorative. It means, as the root meant for the Romans, the language of the household, of daily life. We all speak it. It is a language in which newspapers, magazines, and books are published. It's a language of radio, television. When they are talking about the individual, it is a language used by psychologists, sociologists, anthropologists, political scientists, and economists, all the behavioral sciences. It is the language used by professionals when they deal with their clients for the very simple reason it is the only language the clients understand. Now, there's a very curious thing about that language. The vernacular refers very richly to feelings and states of mind, so that there is some reason to suspect that we are back with what psychologists have been looking for, However, if you examine the terms in the vernacular, you'll find that each one has a double meaning. I say, I'm hungry, and I think I'll get something to eat. Now, what am I saying? Am I mentioning a feeling, hunger, and am I talking about some cognitive process called thinking? Or am I conveying to someone something about my personal history? To say I am hungry is to say, among other things, I haven't eaten for some time. To say I am hungry, among other things, says, if you give me some food, I'll probably eat it. The terms in the vernacular which seem to refer to feelings and states of mind are really talking about contingencies of reinforcement, about the world and about its effect on people. 3 years ago, I published a paper in the American Psychologist. I've had too great a share of that journal, I'm afraid. But it was called The Origins of Cognitive Thought. In it, I considered perhaps 70 or 80 words, each of which referred, on the one hand, to a mental process of some kind, but on the other, to a purely physical kind of thing, either to the kind of situation in which a person finds himself or herself, or the contingencies which are operating to select behavior appropriate to that situation. There are, in my own experience, some 1,500 words that have that double meaning. Now, what has happened, I think, is that psychology has split in two ways. One part going in the direction of finding out the essence of the feeling, the essence of the cognitive process, and the other going in the direction of references to contingencies of reinforcement. The psychologist who is a professional, who is a practitioner, uses the vernacular of his or her clients to find out more about what has happened to them and what they are probably going to do. The psychologist who claims to be a scientist investigating, searching for an inner originating, creative, or initiating self is quite different and is doing quite different things. What has happened, I think, is that psychology has advanced as a practice, as a profession, far more rapidly than as a science. It began as a science. That is, it began as an effort to discover what was going on inside the mind or the self. But as the membership of this organization shows, it was the people who were interested in that particular topic soon became the minority. They were not only replaced by the professionals, but by psychologists who didn't care too much about what was going on inside, but were interested in behavior, not necessarily as behaviorists, in teaching, clinical psychology, developmental psychology, and so on. And those became important sciences quite apart from an effort to isolate an originating mind or self. The whole notion of selection by consequences seems extremely difficult to understand. We've seen what has happened in evolution. It is still true that biology cannot be properly taught in America because those who call themselves creationists or creation scientists oppose it as some kind of threat. If I say that psychologists, in searching for this inner self or mind, have wasted their time, you may feel that I am being arrogant. If I say that the philosophers who, over the centuries, have tried to discover themselves in that sense, that I am being arrogant. But I would call your attention to the fact that equally or even more brilliant men and women over a much longer period of time have been trying to establish the existence of and the nature of a different creator, in this case spelled with a capital C. Now, that is a very great problem. And you know how difficult it has been for natural selection to be accepted. Imagine how difficult it is going to be for the individual selection by consequences of operant behavior, or the other evolution of cultures and the other kinds of selection which take over the role of a creative self or mind. So far as I'm concerned, cognitive science is the creationism of psychology. It is an effort to reinstate that inner, initiating, originating, creative self or mind, which in a scientific analysis simply does not exist. I think this association has been through a recent trial just because of this difference. It has, as you know, suffered a kind of secession by cognitive psychologists who are unhappy when they associate with so many practitioners. And I would regard it not as a secession, but as an improvement. I think it is time for psychology as a profession and as a science in such fields as psychotherapy, education, developmental psychology, and all the rest. It is time to realize that the science which will be most helpful is not cognitive science searching for the inner mind or self, but selection by consequences represented by behavior analysis. Looking back on my life, 62 years as a psychologist, I would say that what I have tried to do, what I've been doing, is to make that point clear, to show how selection by consequences in the individual can be demonstrated in the laboratory with animals and with human subjects, and to show the implications of that for the world at large in not only the profession of psychology, but in consideration of what is going to happen to the world unless some very vital changes are made. Any evidence that I've been successful in that is what I should like to be remembered by. Once again, thank you for this award and for your attention.
On August 18, 1990, 8 days after delivering the keynote address at APA's 98th Annual Convention, Burris Frederick Skinner died at Mount Auburn Hospital in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Então, vocês puderam assistir aí, né, esse interessante vídeo, né, ele vai colocar tantas coisas, é um vídeo tão rico, né, gente, pra gente poder entender, né, nada melhor que o autor mesmo nos explicar a sua teoria. Então, ele vai colocar logo de início ali o problema da introspecção, né? Por que que, então, a psicologia acaba se afastando desse caminho da introspecção? Ele vai abordar também o problema da comprovação das teorias científicas na área da psicologia e vai nos dizer por que que, então, é tão importante, se torna tão importante nesse momento em que ele vive, né, ali, se afastar para a grande maioria dos psicólogos, cientistas, né, se afastar, então, da introspecção e se aproximar das ciências do cérebro, né, porque há muitas dificuldades comprobatórias, né, das teorias que vão nesse caminho da introspecção, do entendimento do comportamento a partir dos sentimentos, né, das questões internas do homem, olhando para dentro de si mesmo. Então, vocês puderam ver que ele mesmo fala, né, sobre os filósofos. Ele vai dizer ali que a psicologia bebe muito da filosofia nos seus temas, e durante um certo tempo ela se volta exatamente como os filósofos para o interior do homem, né, como uma herança da filosofia. Eu tenho dito para vocês nas aulas, né, a questão do Sócrates, conhece-te a ti mesmo, esse olhar para dentro de si mesmo, do ser humano, né. Então, os psicólogos, durante um certo tempo, durante um bom tempo, melhor dizendo, eles carregaram esse problema da introspecção. E lá pelas tantas, então, em razão da dificuldade de se comprovar as teorias científicas que estavam sendo produzidas por aí, grande parte dos cientistas da área da psicologia vão se voltar para as ciências do cérebro. E ele pergunta ali no vídeo, né, como vocês puderam assistir, mas será que o cérebro dá origem ao comportamento, como se diz que é feito pela mente ou pelo self? Então, será que é o mesmo tipo de origem, né? Aquilo que o cérebro produz e aquilo que o comportamento, o eu, né, o self, ou a nossa mente tem capacidade de produzir como comportamento? E ele, na resposta, né, ele vai apontar, então, para o empirismo, né, e a gente já trabalhou aqui as questões do empirismo e a gente já viu também que o behaviorismo e o empirismo andam juntos, né? Então, o Skinner vai, nesse vídeo, nos mostrar a importância daquilo que está fora do indivíduo, né? Que são circunstâncias condicionantes, se não estou enganada, que ele fala no vídeo, né? São as circunstâncias externas para uma evolução do comportamento. Então, sim, o homem tem muitas coisas dentro de si que precisam ser entendidas, né? Mas não é através de teorias que não possam se comprovar que a gente vai alcançar algum tipo de verdade, né? Na visão do Skinner, isso só pode ocorrer se a gente considerar as circunstâncias externas que atingem o nosso comportamento, que modificam, fazem com que ele evolua, né? Então, ele vai apontar algumas, né, circunstâncias externas. Ele vai trazer a questão da seleção natural, né, que nós, seres humanos, então, temos um cérebro que se desenvolveu, né, e conseguimos aprender. Então, espero que vocês tenham prestado atenção bastante nessa parte. Ele vai dizer que isso não é, então, algo que caracterize todas as espécies, mas é uma característica própria da espécie humana e de algumas outras espécies, né, pouquíssimas. Ele vai falar também da diferença ali entre o ambiente natural e o ambiente social, apontando a importância do ambiente social, aquele que é construído pelo homem, né, para o aparecimento do condicionamento operante, tá? Então, ou seja, para que haja o comportamento operante, é preciso que se tenha um ambiente social e não apenas um ambiente natural. E ele vai trazer também a questão da cultura como as circunstâncias, né, externas que condicionam, que podem alterar, fazer que haja uma certa evolução no comportamento. E mais para o final desse vídeo, muito interessante, ele vai colocar então as diferentes perspectivas, né, a perspectiva da psicologia clínica, né, ele vai nos dizer da importância do entendimento da linguagem, né, da importância do entendimento do vernáculo para poder entender o indivíduo que está buscando um tratamento clínico, e ele vai colocar também da psicologia científica, né, nesse sentido dos psicólogos científicos se preocuparem em fazer testes, né, ir para laboratórios, fazer experiências que produzam teorias para que se compreenda então o comportamento humano de grupo e não individual necessariamente. Eu espero que vocês tenham gostado, né, apreciado esse vídeo e que tenham entendido a nossa aula de hoje. Qualquer dúvida, entre em contato com a nossa equipe e até a nossa próxima aula.